These are going to be your water notes for the properties of water. So first I'm going to talk to you guys about proteins. We already talked about them in a little bit, but proteins are made of amino acids. They're a polymer. They fold into a 3D shape. However, when you heat them or they're in acid, they lose their shape or function. So that's very important to know about proteins as we move along. Here are some extraordinary properties of water. Let's start with some general characteristics. A water molecule is made up of 3 atoms, 1 oxygen, which is this red atom here, and 2 atoms of hydrogen, and those come together to make up the H2O molecule. Almost looks like Mickey Mouse. Second important thing to know about water is that it's polar. The oxygen end of water acts like a negative charge. Acts like it has a negative charge because it pulls the electrons over to it really, really closely. While the hydrogen end acts like it has a positive charge because the electrons are pulled away from it. And this causes the water to be polar, meaning it has these negative and positive ends. However, water itself is neutral, meaning it has 0 net charge. It doesn't have a charge like an ion does, but it is a polar molecule. Because of this polarity, hydrogen bonds exist between water molecules. So those form between the electronegative atom of a polar molecule and hydrogen. In this case, the electronegative atom is going to be the oxygen. So the hydrogen is going to attach to the oxygen, just like you see here. One hydrogen bond is really weak, easy to break apart, but if you have lots of them together, it's strong. And this property of these hydrogen bonds and the polarity causes a lot of the properties of water that we see. So here's some interaction between water molecules. The negative oxygen is attracted to the positive hydrogen. And some properties of water. The first property of water is what temperature it boils at. So water boils at 100 degrees Celsius and it freezes at 0 degrees Celsius. And in between those, 37 degrees Celsius is human body temperature and room temperature is 23 degrees Celsius. Water has cohesion, adhesion, high specific heat, and it's less dense as a solid. And we'll talk about each of those later in the notes. The first is cohesion. Cohesion is the attraction between particles of the same substance, meaning that water is attracted to itself. This results in something called surface tension, meaning the strength of the surface of the water. And this produces a surface film, as you can see here with these water molecules, that even insects are able to walk on the surface of the water because of this really high surface tension. So here's some examples of cohesion and surface tension, and you can see that insects are walking right across the top of the water. And I'll show you the YouTube example on a later date. So that's cohesion, the attraction of water to itself. Adhesion is attraction between 2 different substances, just like gluing something together. Water makes hydrogen bonds with many surfaces, such as glass, soil, plant tissues, cotton. And you can see this when it rains on your windshield. You see all the water bead up and stick to the glass. Because of this adhesion as well as cohesion, there's something called capillary action, and in this, water molecules tow each other along in a thin glass tube. You can also see the same kind of thing in a paper towel. If you put the edge of a paper towel into water, the water is going to travel up the paper towel. An example of this in nature is called transpiration. So plants and trees remove water from the soil. And capillary action, if we lowered this straw into water, the water would travel up the straw, especially if the straw was very, very thin. Adhesion also causes water to form droplets on a silken spiderweb and to form spheres that hold on to plant leaves. All examples of water adhesion in nature. The third property of water is specific heat. Water has a very high specific heat. Specific heat is the amount of heat that must be absorbed or lost for 1 gram of a substance to change its temperature by 1 degree Celsius. 3/4 of the earth is covered by water, and the water is a really high heat sink, meaning it can take a lot of heat from the earth without changing its temperature. So this prevents temperature fluctuations that would be way too high for us to survive on the planet or way too low for us to survive on the planet. If you're by the coast, like if you watch the weather, the shore in the summer has a cooler temperature, but in the winter has a higher temperature, and that's because that water's high specific heat. It keeps the temperature really temperate. That's why San Francisco and London, or England, all have really temperate temperatures. And it also has a stable marine environment. So here's some specific heats of different substances. So water as a liquid has a specific heat of 1. So it takes 1 calorie to raise the temperature 1 degree. 1 calorie to raise 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. And then you can see gold has a really, really, really low specific heat. So water is really high, gold's really low. Another really important property of water is that it's less dense as a solid. Now, guess which one is ice and which one's water? This is water, and on the right is ice. And that's because of the crystalline structure. The organization of the water molecules leaves these holes, leaves these crystals, so it's actually less dense. That's really important because ice floats. If ice sank, the whole lake might freeze over the winter, and then every single organism in that lake would die because it was frozen. So the fact that ice floats is very important. And so because of all these properties of water, especially its polarity, we have things called hydrophilic substances and hydrophobic substances. Hydrophilic, you can think of the word hydro meaning water and philic meaning love, just like Philadelphia is a city of brotherly love. Hydrophilic molecules are substances that like water, and these are going to be your polar molecules, so things that are the same like each other. Hydrophobic molecules, so again water and then phobic, like phobia, being afraid of something, are substances that fear or don't like water, and these are going to be the nonpolar molecules like oil or soap. So those end our notes for today. Hope your note page is all filled out, and I will see you next time.